When it comes to 10-driver locomotives, although they weren't in that great of numbers compared to other locomotives, they still did decent heavy work for many railroads' trains. While many 8-driver locomotives like the Mountains, Northerns, and Mikados hauled mainly medium to heavy freights, the biggest of passenger trains, and pulled the mail, and the 6-driver locomotives like the Pacific's 10-wheelers and Prairies pulled the medium to lightest passenger trains and freight work, 10-driver locomotives, and to a way lesser extent 12-driver locomotives, would still focus on freight work that was too heavy for the smaller locomotives, but didn't require an articulated to pull it, mainly on the main line. Although some of the assignments for some 10-driver locomotives did include passenger trains too. However, much like so many other locomotives of the time, the 10-driver locomotives were eventually put out of a job in the 1950s when the diesels came. Just like me and a bunch of other Americans right now. Yet, that doesn't mean they were unimportant in railroad history, nor in legacy either. So in this video, I'll be covering every locomotive that had 10 driving wheels, as well as 12 driving wheels. So the 210 Decapods, and no, I'm not gonna go adopted children that were originally gonna go to Russia for each one, 210 Santa Fe's, 210 Texas's, and even some rarer locomotives that had 10 driving wheels like El Gubernador. So, without further ado, here is every North American 10 and 12 driver locomotive described in 15 words or less. Serving an Illinois Central subsidiary and later getting sent to Chicago. A giant switcher working for a Mopac and CNW subsidiary in St. Louis. Built from 210-2 frames and some of the B&O's biggest switchers. Working for a Burlington subsidiary and dead before the end of World War I. The biggest switchers ever rostered on the Canadian Pacific. Well suited for assembling long coal trains and lasting until 1956. The only other railroad to use 010-2 locomotives. Later serving the Duluth-Missabi and Iron Range Railroad as the Ore Sorter Quartet. Serving a Pennsy subsidiary and now the only 010-0 on display in Indianapolis. Operating on hump yards across the system, with a few being rebuilt as superheaters. The strongest engine on the N and SS, but doesn't survive. Hauling freight trains for the Grand Trunk Railway underneath the St. Clair River. The most 010-2s sent to the Diamond IR and now on display in Greenville, PA. Hey, that rhymes. Kinda. The biggest steam locomotive from the AT&N, and now at the age of steam roundhouse. One of the most unknown steam locomotive fleets from the Santa Fe. One of many Decapods that were originally going to go to Russia, but ended up serving the Southeast. Later got rebuilt with superheating and then served the Baltimore and Ohio. Built by the Canpack themselves, though their boilers were quite small. Later getting sold off to the MN&S and to the Seaboard. Later getting some adopted sisters from the AT&N. Okay, it's just another typical Decapod, nothing that Hold on a sec. The Erie had Decapods that were also camelbacks? Holy crap. Doing it the Great Western Way in Colorado and now an excursion star at Strasburg. And also a bit of a childhood star for me as well.
There's a magic about riding in an old coach pulled by an iron horse relic, where the trip becomes primary, the destination secondary.
God, I love G-Skill Journeys so much. Would you like the regular variant or the My Chemical Romance fan variant? Seriously, why did some of these steam locomotives have hoods? Slightly fat locomotives that were rebuilt from 282 boilers. I don't know about you, but that tender seems a bit small. The only Decapod that the Sioux line had, and the only Sioux line Decapod that survives.
Пошел нахуй, даун ебаный, ебал ты, блядь, свинью пидорасов, сука, блядь!
Later continued their service lives on the Missouri Pacific. Initially worked on Stampede Pass switchbacks before being sent to yards. Hard working and giving it 110% on the Osage Railway. Yeah, all the tits jokes were taken.
Jerry, we need to make our
Decapods.
hot! No, sir, stop it! Isn't this enough? It needs tits, Jerry!
So the only other thing I thought of was a Nakano Himejima Ara Ara joke.
No, I'm from England, America!
So fuck. Who's your president?
Michael Jordan!
Now with several surviving, albeit all in Gainesville Midland markings.
What the fuck?
Decapods for the SP's subsidiaries in the southwestern part of the SP's network. I became most perfect train for Frisco branches, then became best engine for AMM mainline. Oh my god, I can't do the Russian voice. Including both Russian locomotives and the Western Maryland zone designs. Originally for Russia, sent to Texas, arrived on the Orient, died on the Santa Fe. Originally built solely for freight purposes, but became a well-used mixed traffic engine. Canadian National-styled Santa Fe types for a railroad that ultimately never reached the Hudson Bay. USRA-type designs that later became Wabash locomotives and then became Kansas City Southern locomotives. The very railroad that the 210-2 type got its name from, with 940 surviving. Serving the A, B, and C well for many years until serving the rest of their lives on the ACL, with the ACL's own 210-2s. Big sixes for the B&O, but sadly the B&O wasn't able to preserve one. Or at least they tried to preserve one B&O Big Six, but that one yardmaster assumed that they were headed for scrap and sent them for scrapping. At least assuming you believe that one story where a B&O EM1, one or two Big Sixes, and maybe even a B&O 482 were destined for the B&O Railroad Museum, but when they were sitting at a yardmaster assumed that they were bound for scrapping and sent them for scrapping. If the story is real, since it honestly sounds like a bit of an urban legend to me, that seriously sucks. Well used on the Bessemer, but not nearly as well known as their 210-4 cousins. Serving both a railroad and a coal and steel company until the end of steam. Served the railroad well, but not nearly as well known as some of the other B&M steamers. So they listened to My Chemical Romance. Serving well on the CN, with 2 making it into preservation, built by the railroad themselves and served well, but not as lucky enough for preservation as the CN Santa Fe's. Engines don't survive, but a 210-2 tender does survive with Southern 4501. Suffering from low factor of adhesion and low speed, which caused the C&I to sell all of them. Some original locomotives, some locomotives from the Wabash, and some locomotives from the ACL. A light Santa Fe type serving a terminal railroad going in and out of Dearborn Station. 6 scrapped in the 1930s, but 800 lasted till the end of steam. Coming in several varieties for both the Q and its C&S subsidiary. The biggest locomotives ordered for the Monon, albeit for mostly slow drags. Also,
Oh, up and down the Monon, everything is fine, 'cause that rootin' tootin' Monon, she's a whole year line. Oh, up and down. down the Monon, everything is fine. Cause that rootin' tootin' Mona, she's a Hoosier line.
Had counterbalancing issues and were limited to 30 miles per hour, necessitating refitting. Later transferred to the CNW and converted into O-10-2s. Both helper locomotives and regular freight locomotives for the Rio Grande's Tennessee Pass line. Sent to the DM&IR for continued ore service, and now, to survive. Would you like a regular tender or a Vanderbilt tender with your Santa Fe order, sir? Rebuilt from 482 locomotives and very well used on drag freights for the Great Northern. Originally built for the hawking, but spent most of their lives on the C&O. Some originals, some from the central of Georgia and Alabama and Vicksburg, all scrapped. Originally from China and now excursion stars in Iowa. The biggest engines for a bridge railroad between the Missouri Pacific and the Texas and Pacific. Well used when they initially entered service, but fast freights made them redundant. Original locomotives overhauled during World War II and a couple bought from the Wabash. Some of the best pulling power for the New Haven, but they experienced counterbalancing issues which limited their speeds. Serving an NYC subsidiary before going to the NYC themselves and the Big Four. Not as well recognized as their 482s, but they still got the freight work done on the NYO and W. Serving freight trains greatly, and later rebuilt with Belpaire fireboxes. Most original locomotives, although 2 locomotives did come from the Hocking Valley. Several rebuilt from 2882 Malays. I'm dead serious about that. With some new builds also included. Now including a Vanderbilt tender. And subsequently scrapped by 1930. USRE designs that were ultimately well used for freight trains out of Hamlet. USRE designs that were handled by people who had a severe lack of sanity. I'm serious, this is an actual design from the Southern Railway. I'm pretty sure that the Southern Railway was full of mentally challenged people. Would you like the front rod to have a blank expression or a smiling expression, sir? Served well and were later rebuilt into 4300 and 4400 class 482s. Well, even with 10 driver locomotives, there still are going to be some mandated logging variants. Both Alco and Baldwin locomotives serving the Texas and Pacific, with a couple later getting sold to NDM. Sat for decades in the UP Steam Shop and now coming back in Silvis, Illinois. A variety of standardized Santa Fe type designs for railroads across America. The most Union Pacific looking locomotive from a railroad that isn't the Union Pacific, with several getting sold to the KCS, Mopac, and C&IM later on. The best heavy freight locomotives for the Santa Fe, with several, including Madam Queen, surviving. Alright, that looks good so far. Hang on a sec. Yeah, what's up? Yeah, hello?
Were you just showing the Bessemer and Lake Erie 210-4s and didn't mention 643?
Oh, come on, I showed at least 2 photos of 643. Isn't that good enough?
No, you just put the Bessemer and Lake Erie song. I'm demanding you mention BLE 643.
Or else what?
Or else I'll crash one of the Bessemer tunnel motors straight into your house.
Oh, come on. There is no way that you could have actually... Oh my god, how did you actually, get a Bessemer and Lake Erie tunnel motor outside my house?
Oh, that doesn't matter. Now say this about the 210-4s. The best engines for the Bessemer, with one of them being 643, now preserved at Aegis Roundhouse.
Alright, I'll do it. The best engines for the Bessemer, with one of them, 643, now preserved at the age of steam roundhouse. Okay, hopefully I won't have a tunnel motor get crashed into my home now. Coming both with and without streamlining, and now 2 of them are now preserved. Honestly, never knew that the Central Vermont had Texas types until now. Inspired by the Erie, pulled the heaviest freight trains on the C&O, and later all were scrapped. Doing it the Great Western Way in the Midwest, and all were scrapped anyways. Served on freights, one did an excursion, and died because its valve gear crapped out. That's a real shame, because I honestly think this would have been a good locomotive for a static display. Almost came into existence, but the Erie liked the Berks the most. The last steam locomotives built new for the KCS, and some of their best performing steam locomotives. Honestly, it's a real shame that all of them got cut up. I think one of them should have been preserved. Inspired by the C&O, pulled the PRR's heaviest trains, died anyways. And no, I do not believe that there is any such thing as a buried PRR J1. It would take all sorts of levels of impossibility for that to have even been remotely true. The Railroad 210-4s are named from, with one preserved, and pulled the American Freedom Train. When will we get our freedom back? One of the few 410-0s built, but had poor performance and various design issues. For additional context, watch Train of Thought's video on El Gobernador. The 60,000th Baldwin built, intended for future development, wasn't persuasive enough, but is now preserved. Well used across the SP's network, with one now preserved. And also Scary Ghost Train. Named as Overlands, but had poor performance issues, although the UP tried to fix them. The biggest non-articulated on the Union Pacific, but restricted to flatlands. Though, one does survive. One of the most unorthodox but really interesting experiments by the Philadelphia and Reading. And that is every 10-driver and 12-driver types owned by North American railroads. I am fairly certain that I got all of the 10-driver and 12-driver locomotives that were owned by various railroads, but oh dear God, after all the previous episodes, I am not exactly that sure. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video anyways. This video, as usual, was inspired by Cal Unit Productions' 10 words or less videos, and other 10 words or less videos by other YouTubers, though the additional 5 words instead of just 10 was inspired by the Rocket City Railfan, aka Andrew's, Paramarquette Locomotives video. As an additional note, as of the making of this video, and as I am recording this October 12th, 2025, yesterday, my first 15 words or less video, that of the 482 types, has officially turned 1 year old, and I am still so happy that I've gotten so much support for that video. And of the latter videos like the 484s, combined 284s and 464s, even though I screwed the first version up relating to the New York Central Hudsons, 462s, 282s, and more. The next 15 words or less video that I am hoping to make will be of the 442 Atlantic types, as suggested by somebody on the Western Maryland train that I was on over the summer. And I would like to try and do the 040 and 060s by the end of the year, but I am not guaranteeing that, especially since I've also started up my new Engines of the Rio Grande series, and as of right now, I am making the SD45 video for Engines of the Rio Grande, as well as considering both the next locomotive for my Engines of the Rio Grande series. I am currently heavily weighing on making the GP30s, GP40s, GP50s, and GP60s, and wondering if I should try and make an Engines of the Southern Pacific series in tandem with the Engines of the Rio Grande series, or if I should finish up the Rio Grande locomotives before making an Engines of the Southern Pacific series. You guys are more than welcome to tell me in the comments what you think, but that's currently what's going through my mind right now, since I am doing a lot of this work alongside doing college work too, and also hoping that I do not get burnt out in the process. But even so, thank you guys for 1 year of my 15 words or less series, and a huge shout out to Ashton Studio Productions for the bit with the Bessemer and Lake Erie 210-4s, especially 643. In addition, thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys liked it, and I also hope I got all the railroads that own 10 and 12 driver locomotives in North America. And until next time, sparkle, sparkle, sparkle. Anyways, I've been talking a bit too much about myself, and I have to complete an essay, so goodbye.